David Lynch's Dune from 1984, based on the novel by Frank Herbert, is considered largely to be a sci-fi cinematic masterpiece. Bold, operatic, and memorable for its highly stylized visual designs, the film brings the multi-dimensional futuristic universe of Dune to life in a believable way. Now, for full disclosure, I'm not actually a fan of this film, but that's primarily because I don't like David Lynch films in general. I find this film needlessly convoluted, barely comprehensible, and pretentious as a result. Now, I'm all for alternative filmmaking and the breaking of storytelling conventions in the interests of art, but when style comes before substance and an otherwise accessible plot becomes unnecessarily complicated, confusing, and hard to follow, then that's a big mistake in my view. The analogy I would use is like a driver of a car deliberately taking a much longer route to a destination just to be awkward rather than going via the shortest and most direct route possible. Similarly, if you can make a point in one paragraph, why go on a long-winded tangent and make the same point in 10 verbose paragraphs using extraneous words just to try to sound intelligent? If you've ever seen David Lynch's film Mulholland Drive, just as a for instance, I think he enjoys leaving things open to interpretation for the audience. And that's fine. There's a time and a place for that kind of thing. Mulholland Drive has been called a kind of puzzle box of a film. I would call it a self-indulgent mess. In fact, it's so hard to follow that in the DVD box, there was a piece of paper included with clues and hints for the audience to watch out for in order to figure out the plot. Now, some people will look at that and say, yeah, that's kind of a unique selling point. Something different, a challenge for the viewer, something to fire the neurons. I disagree. I think a film like Mulholland Drive is the cinematic equivalent of modern art in the Tate Museum in London. It's incomprehensible, interpretive garbage that's trying to claim to be profound and deep, and people who like that kind of thing will say, you just don't get it. You're just not sophisticated and you have no taste. That's why I find Lynch's work so pretentious. It's like an attempt to seem smarter than the audience, when in actual fact, the plot isn't that complicated. The content is actually more shallow and superficial than you're being led to believe. I don't like this postmodern style of leave it up to the audience interpretation. It's all about what it means to you. I just find that kind of lazy and gimmicky. Either there's coherent content or there's just incoherent noise. In the case of Mulholland Drive, spoilers, it's just a dream and a wacky exploration of the protagonist's subconscious mind. In the case of Dune, the plot certainly has a lot going on, but it's not any more complicated than the kind of plot you'd get from a Star Wars movie. It's just the way the film is executed that lets it down, in my view. Now, if you look at a film like Christopher Nolan's Memento, many people also find that film needlessly convoluted and hard to follow. And I can totally understand why they think that, but the same argument can't be made against Memento as I've just made against Mulholland Drive. Both films require the audience to pay very careful attention from the very start to the very end, and they're both most definitely unconventional movies in their structure and narrative framing. But Memento, a film I very much like, actually has a coherent logic to it, once you realize that the story is being told and edited from the perspective of a man who's unable to make new long-term memories. The film actually makes perfect sense, and it's just that the plot is not being told in chronological order. It unfolds from the point of view of a damaged mind. In fact, it's possible to edit the entire film in chronological order and it makes perfect sense. By contrast, a film like Mulholland Drive is really just a wacky, unstructured, and pretty random series of events. And while there is a story there, it's simply not very coherent. Other Lynch films like Lost Highway, Eraserhead, and Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me are not easy to make much sense out of. I do acknowledge that Lynch has a great capacity for creating unnerving, surreal, and extremely tense and suspenseful scenes, but I refuse to accept style over substance. Dune is a difficult watch and not easy to follow. In the beginning, there's far too much clunky exposition, and it's easy to lose track of the various characters, factions, and political motivations behind them. It's the year 10,191, and the desert planet Arrakis, known as Dune, is the source of a powerful substance called the spice melange, which can be used by spaceships to fold space and also enables people to see the future. The substance is highly sought after, obviously, and is protected on the surface of the planet by highly dangerous giant sandworms. On the planet Caladan, Duke Leto of the House of Atreides is to take over as governor of Arrakis. Both he and his son Paul Atreides are concerned about an ambush from their enemies, the Harkonnens. The plan is to work with the native people of Arrakis, the Fremen, who live in the desert, and make use of these special suits that help them retain water, because it never rains on Arrakis. A battle ensues for control of the planet, and Paul must train and prepare the hardy Fremen people using Atreides' weaponry. Throughout the film, Paul is compelled and haunted by mysterious visions of the future. It becomes obvious that he is a messianic figure who was prophesied to help liberate the Fremens, leading them to victory over their enemies. He destroys the old order of aristocratic, power-hungry oligarchs and brings peace to the universe. Recently, Morgoth's Review did an excellent analysis of the political themes of this film. His video is linked below. He talks about how the dissident right appreciate this film's messaging. In the future, mankind has returned to an aristocratic neo-feudal society of dukes and monarchs, which gives the story very much a period feel. A tiny elite cabal of competing houses control all resources in the galaxy, making everyone else little more than serfs. Dune feels more like Star Wars in that it's science fantasy mixed with magic, while Star Trek is more tech science-based. The film could be seen as a commentary on the destruction of a powerful decadent bourgeoisie and the rise of a proletariat. That humanity will, move away from such a top-down, hierarchical, materialistic society and instead have a spiritual renaissance and a move back toward a prioritization of the transcendent. The world of Dune is one that respects traditional gender roles, that men and women have their own unique roles to play in society. Men of this future age aspire to nobility and warrior status. The women are certainly feminine and powerful in other ways. This is a world of witches, psychics, and seers, that kind of thing. The film occasionally delves into the disturbing and macabre, with elites like Duke Baron Harkonnen being degenerate and depraved, power-crazed monsters. Some of his scenes are really unsettling to watch and border on unnecessarily grotesque and just generally sadistic and messed up. So the story speaks on multiple levels: political corruption, upheaval, revolution, Paul's personal journey of self-discovery and realization of his destiny, a period of disorder preceding the fall of an aristocratic society. The collective spiritual conviction of a tiny, oppressed minority of Fremen being led by a messianic figure in a holy war against all-powerful, nefarious, evil, greedy galactic oligarchs obsessed with consolidating their control of resources. Is it any wonder that the story resonates today? The fall of a decadent empire that has navel-gazed far too long, concerned with its own material wealth and hedonism, followed by the rise of a new spiritual awakening and a restoration of God as the ultimate authority instead of man. In that regard, I appreciate the themes of the film. Dune is an okay story. I don't think it's as good as people claim that it is. The film certainly has the visual canvas and budget to do it justice. My issue is with David Lynch's approach. The characters needed to be more relatable and human in the screenplay. They're mostly one-dimensional, cold, and lacking in depth. Like I said before, the film is very exposition-heavy, and there's far too much information coming at the viewer in the first hour. There's a lot of factions and characters to set up, and it just drones on a bit. There's a lot of esoteric dream sequences that seem overly indulgent, more like something out of a music video. The editing also lets the film down, with cuts that are at times confusing. Also, something really should have been done about that space folding scene, with the alien that seems to puke or shit out energy beams. I had no idea what was going on in this scene, or why it had to look this way, but it's just really weird. Also, I'm not 100% sold on the voiceovers, the inner monologues in the characters' heads. Hearing their thoughts does occasionally help to clear things up and gives us some insights into their motivations, and it can be sometimes kind of trippy and interesting. But other times I found it distracting and it took me out of the moment. Overall, Dune 1984 is a massive mess, in my opinion. The book has a lot of deep mythology, and I appreciate that it can be a challenge to translate that world to the big screen. but there's no reason for the film to be so difficult to follow as it is. I find the film an endurance to watch and just generally lacking in fun. If you're a fan of this film, no hard feelings, good for you. I know that it's probably sacrilegious among classic sci-fi movie fans for me to not like this film, but I have to be honest, Dune is a hard pass for me.